morning, everyone. I'm not sure if I can see that, but I'll have the sheets. As Richard said, my name is Honor. I'm working with Mayo County Council at the minute. I was a consultant for many years, and now I'm on the other side, so I have dual perspective, perhaps. There's a few elements in this that I'm going to talk about. I've tried to keep the slides succinct and precise, but I do tend to talk. So if there's things you want clarification on later, my details are at the end, or by all means, grab me at the tea time. But I tend to waffle a little. So anyway, you might have to pull me back on time. So just a few points to note. I believe this is going to be uploaded to the MBCO website. So there's blue text in my presentation that is a hyperlink to the web pages that I'm talking about, and also a useful document that we have in Mayo that our esteemed colleague Lee Murphy developed. It's very useful, so I think it's a good tool to use. And then, yeah, I'm happy to field questions. I know we have a Q&A, but if you're like me, I won't remember the question I wanted to ask. So if you think of something, by all means, throw your hands up. Right, so I just want to say thank you to the MBCO and to our chief, Tony Shevlin, for the opportunity to come to speak here today, and to my esteemed colleague, Nessa Gannon and Lee Murphy for their support and advice in putting this together, and also to Sarah Fitzpatrick, who thought of me in her stead when she wasn't able to come. I'm going to talk about the application process and documents required to comply with Part B of the building regulations from a fire authority's point of view. In other words, how to make a fire safety certificate application that will be validated and hopefully granted, be it with conditions or otherwise. Okay, so these I'm going to highlight the bits and pieces we look for, and as it were, the bugbears from our side that we're always going back out saying, can you change or can you do? Okay, so I'm going to go down through each of those bits and pieces, typical bits and pieces. What I would say is, for the consultant contingency in the crowd and online, if you can pay attention to the last 2 points, because that's the documentation and the validation, that's where we have a lot of bother back and forth. So if you can pay attention, if you're switching off up until that point, can you pay attention when I get to those? Thanks. Okie dokie. So first and foremost, the next slide, please, if you don't mind. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh, here I go. Sorry, I'm not techie. So straight out of the regs, the definition is fire safety certificate is a certificate issued by the building control regs or building control authority, which states that the works or buildings to which the application relates, if constructed in accordance with the plans, drawings and specifications submitted, comply with the regulations of Part B. Straightforward enough. There's more detail given in article. Again, that's a hyperlink, so I believe it's going to be available online, so you should be able to click into that. And then all right, okay, well, so when it is required as well, I had mooched this along, but there's times when it is required, when a fire safety certificate is required, and there's certain exemptions. So ultimately, anywhere you build a new building where there's material alteration, a change of use, an extension or a subdivision, you're looking at needing a fire cert, be it a new building or existing. There's certain exemptions to that, like a domestic garage, a dwelling other than a flat, a single-storey agricultural building, and then, as it were, an adjacent storage area to a house or a dwelling that isn't used for profit or gain. They're the exceptions where you're not required to submit a fire safety cert. Okay, and then we've got 4 different types of fire safety certificates that you can make. So we're talking standard, 7-day, revised and regulation. Standard, I would imagine, probably countrywide, serves about 80% of applications coming in. It's a standard fee capped at 12,500 to 290 per square metre, okay? It's required for any new builds, any material change of use, material alteration, an extension to an existing building or a subdivision of existing buildings, okay? Be mindful of the paperwork. Okay, I'll get into it a bit further down the line, but be mindful that all the descriptions match, and please do not copy the planning description. Okay, it's windy and waffly and sometimes isn't applicable. We don't need to know about external parking. You know, be concise in your description of the works proposed. These are little bugbears for us, and it's back and forth, and that description appears on your final grant. So you could have half a page with the description and your cert is sitting off. Okay, so just be mindful of little things like that. It's covered anyway in more detail in Article 11. The 7-day notice This is a risky one in terms of proceeding ahead. So you're essentially, when you apply for a 7-day notice, the 7-day notice side of it is the commencement notice side. So a general commencement notice, you'd probably submit it 14 to 28 days before the work commence, but you can do a 7-day notice, obviously 7 days before. So if you send it in on a Tuesday, you can begin the following Tuesday, assuming everything is validated, okay? The issue here is that you're proceeding at risk, because the 7-day is only granted on the basis that a valid fire safety certificate and a statutory declaration is submitted alongside it, okay? When we're looking at validation, we would be checking, like, I don't think the statutory declaration gets enough credit, as it were, or gets enough emphasis. It's a very important document. When you sign, date and stamp that as the agent or the applicant or the owner, you're signing up and committing to comply with Part B of the building regulations and any conditions that may be put on the grant at the end. Like, you're committing to meet those bits and pieces, okay? I think it gets lost sometimes in the ether that it's just another document to fill out and submit. But you are committing to meeting Part B regulations and adhering to any conditions that may go on the cert, all right? But you are proceeding at risk, and it's covered more in Article 28 there, bits and pieces. The revised fire safety cert, we had a bit of discussion this week. And personally, I think I've changed my point of view of when it is required. I do think it's probably used more than it should be, is what we've discovered, or what I've discovered. In my opinion, it's a rare time that you should use it, in that it's capturing, so a revised fire cert is to capture revisions to an internal layout from an already granted fire cert. So say you're doing a new build, for example, and you might need to move a column, or your stairs has to shift and it changes corridors, or it might change a door. Those kind of changes, or indeed it might be a planning condition that came online or something later that you need to adhere to. That is where the revision comes into play. If you're talking about an existing building where you've done, and it's occupied, I suppose the main point there is in terms of a revision or a revised fire safety cert, it's relevant to a building that hasn't fully completed the originally proposed works, or the building isn't yet occupied. The works may be completed, but the building has yet to be occupied. Where you have an existing building, where you're doing an internal layout or alterations internally, and the building is occupied, that's a standard fire safety certificate application. Okay, there's the difference. When we're talking about unoccupied and occupied, they're the major difference. No, sorry, I should caveat, I'm speaking from a Mayo Fire Service perspective. These are our little rules here and there. You may need to, as different consultants, you need to consult with your local authority, because there may be tweaks and twerks as to how different local authorities or building controls approach. They may have a tweak here and there. So just, sorry, to caveat that. And then the final one is a regularisation cert. Again, you need to be mindful when you're submitting these things. It's required where the works have either commenced or been completed without a valid fire safety certificate. It has to be accompanied by a statutory declaration again. I'll hit it again. It's a very important document. You're signing up, committing to comply with Part B and adhere to any conditions set on cert once it's granted. And in this case, there's an extra bit that where the building is occupied, you need to hit those conditions within 4 months of the grant. Now, there might be discussions or a consultation you can have with your local authority or building control that if the building isn't yet occupied, you may be able to push out that 4-month barrier. But that is the rule of thumb, okay? And that's our perspective in Mayo. If their building's occupied, need to hit them on the 4 months, assuming there is a condition. We'd all hope that the application coming in doesn't need anything other than the certs coming through at the end, okay? But that's where we're standing. So, and again, that's covered in there. Did I miss something now? I'll just make sure I have everything. It can be a funny one in that I would be very mindful in terms of the consultants coming in, be very mindful of the regularisations application form, because obviously you can take 25, 50, 75, 100% complete. And be very careful about your wording in your compliance report. We don't want to see any shoulds. Shoulds is a no-no right? No shoulds in any report, thank you very much. And your regularisation cert should be, there I go again, sorry. Oh, faux pas or whatever they call it. It should state categorically, there are. None of this will or shall. It's either in place or it's not when it comes to a regularisation cert. All the other ones can use, the other 3 types could use shall and will. We don't want to see should. Okay, so these, just be mindful of your wording. The other thing I will be careful of, and I'll probably touch on it later, get somebody else to read your report before you submit. The amount of silly typos and the time wasting it involves, backing and forthing, you know. And it doesn't have to be a technical person. It's just a straight read through. Like, you're deep into it. I've been there myself. You're under pressure. The client's knocking at you. Your boss is knocking at you. Just have a quick read before you go and submit, because it's an awful lot of time wasted going back. You're talking about a warehouse, but you're saying it's an office. Or you're talking about a shop, and you've told me about a creche. You know, like, I get that we're copying and pasting everywhere, but just be mindful. You know, 5 minutes with someone is all it needs. All right, and it saves a lot of time. I think that's more. Yeah. Okay. Right. Sound. Be mindful also with the 7 days. If we look for further information, and you're sitting on a 7-day, and you don't get that further information back to us, you're not going to be starting when you're hoping to start. You know, it has to get validated before you're okay to start on site. So if we're looking for something else, I'll get into what we look for later, but be mindful that that pushes out your start date. You know, it's only going to be that you can start works once it's been validated. All right. So if we look for further information at a validation stage, be sure to get it back in a timely manner. You know. All right. So who can submit a fire safety cert? Obviously, a very competent technical advisor, sound knowledge of the building regs, good working process, very familiar with how to make a fire safety certificate application. Okay. Don't be getting any Joe Soap to do your applications. Sometimes it does look like a Joe Soap has come in with the application. Okay, so just be mindful that they need to have sound knowledge of what they're doing. Okay, it should be a decent application. The minimum should be the application form, and then depending on the type that you're coming in with, either a statutory deck, a 7-day notice, the appropriate fee, all the relevant drawings. I'll go through this again in a couple of slides. The relevant drawings, a decent compliance report. And then what I would say to you as a consultant is, if you know you have to do smoke control calculations, or you have to do a bit more detail on your external fire spread, get it done. Like, don't be waiting for us to ask you. If you know it has to be done, get it started. Because some of those models take a while to run anyway, if you're doing smoke code. Like, if you have a complex building you're submitting to your local authority, don't be prolonging it. If you know you have to get it done, start the work, and by all means submit it with the initial application. There's no problem there. We will look at everything we get and assess it when it comes to it. The other thing I would point out is we have from the regs, there's a 2-month period to assess, validate and assess an application. Okay, that 2 month starts to tick from the minute the application is submitted. It's not from when it's validated or processed along. It's from when, and that's automatically generated through the BCMS system. Okay, so if you submit on 1st of October, it's due the 1st of December, unless an extension of time comes in that may push it. But again, that extension of time needs to be qualified. Okay, it's not a given that everybody will give an extension of time. And we have a strict policy in Mayo going forward. So, and it's working for us, I believe. Just be mindful of that when your ticking starts. So when you are asked for further information, well, either further information or revised information, be mindful that unless you're looking for an EOT the other side, you have a limited time to get that information back. And in Mayo, we put a due date on our revised information, and if it's not back by then, and we haven't heard a dicky bird from you, like radio silence, then we will make a decision one way or the other. Okay. So you need to check with your local authorities as well what their policy is, because that will vary local authority to building control people, okay? Right, yes. Now, how the fire safety certificate is submitted. I don't know if I can do the hyperlink. Can I? No, I can't click on the blue. No. Okay, anyway. It's there, you'll have my details give me a listen, or I'll send it on to you. But when you get it, so how you can submit it, the main portal is via the building control management system. Okay, it's online, that's the way to do it. It's not to say you can't submit hard copy either, but fundamentally every bit of correspondence will go back into the BCMS, and any future correspondence on the application will come via the BCMS. You're as well to get familiar with the BCMS, get set up properly, ensure everybody that you need is set up properly. This is a big bugbear. Some people think they are set up on the BCMS. So your main stakeholders need to be set up properly with a fully verified account. Okay, so your applicant, your owner, your engineer, your technical advisor, your contractor. Okay, you can't nominate them without them being set up properly. Okay, so everybody needs to be set up. In Mayo, our policy is we've no problem accepting hard copies coming in, but you still need to get onto the BCMS system to download the pre-populated forms, sign them, date them, stamp them as relevant, and then bring them in, 2 hard copies to us. And then we will charge you to submit that via the BCMS. Now, not every local authority may be like that. They may not charge, or they may not. Like, some might accept hard copies, some might say, no way, it's only BCMS, like, get online. But that's where it's going, okay? But in Mayo, that's our take. So ultimately, you're getting on the BCMS whether you like it or not. So I would familiarise yourself and just get on it. Our colleague Lee Murphy developed a brilliant user guide for how to make an application through the BCMS, the bits and pieces to watch out for. It's the link here. I was hoping I could click on it, but I can't, I'm sorry. But it's a very detailed, very comprehensive, very succinct. It's great work. Well done, Lee. And it's very to the point. It's very user friendly. It's there on our Mayo County Council website. The link will bring you straight to it, but if you're mooching yourself, go through to the fire certificate section, and it's in the useful documents section. Okay, and it's very good. It brings you down through, goes bit by bit what you need to do. Now, making an application on the BCMS system it's a job. All right, it's not a straightforward tick, 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 boom. You have to tick everything that's relevant, and you have to go through it in a steady manner. And you need to be very mindful that once you choose the type of fire safety certificate, you can't change that. So if you've clicked the wrong button, or you've misunderstood what you're trying to do, be it a reg versus a rev, or a standard versus a 7-day. Okay. Now, you can update at later points. It's a bit messy, but you can't change the type. There are certain things we can amend, but we can't change the type typically, unless we actually look for revised information. And because there has been instances, which I'm sure is countrywide, where you'll get in a standard application and they want to update it to a 7-day. Now, that can be done, but it's messy. Okay, so be mindful of those kind of things. The other thing to be mindful of is watch your descriptions again, and make sure that you download. So any of the information that you put into your submission on the BCMS will pre-populate the majority of your application forms, or your 7 days, or your statutory decks. Okay, all that information will pre-populate. The only handwritten part is the signed and dated and stamped by a commissioner of votes. Okay, so that's your statutory deck. And your 7-day needs to be signed and dated. They're the only handwritten parts, but you have to download the forms, sign them and date them. You'll be quite surprised how many come in with no sign and date, and then it's gone back out again. Like, that's a silly waste of time, especially if you're talking about a 7-day. You have to go back out to get a form signed. Like, tick, 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 and especially the statutory deck, if it's not signed and stamped and dated, a commissioner of oaths mightn't be available for a week. They could be gone on holidays. Like, you have to be mindful of things like that. But they all need to be, they're the bugbears that take time away from the 2 months, and take time away from us actually technically assessing the reports, okay, and the drawings. So be mindful of those kind of things. It'd be a bit clearer now if I could scroll down through these lovely documents. But anyway, you've heard me. Yeah, there's a few things like that. Make sure you're putting the name. So when you get to, it's not acceptable to just have a company name as the applicant, okay? You need to put a person's name. Now, you can have the company in a bracket afterwards, but we look for a name. Other counties may vary on this, but our stance in Mayo is that you need to put a name. It's not to an entity of a company, okay? The applicant isn't an entity, it's a person. and they're the responsible person at the end of the day, okay? So that's the way we're going. I'll probably talk that to a death. Right, so straightforward stuff, methods of payments and fee exemptions, okay? Most straightforward way is online portal on the BCMS. Straightforward, work away, happy days, right? You can obviously pay by other methods. What we have in Mayo is that if you are paying by any other way, be it a telephone or cheque or whatever, you tick the exempt fee box and you explain in the box what way you've paid with the reference number, the amount, the date, and you upload the receipt, okay? Because that, again, it's a point that we won't validate an application until the fee has been confirmed as paid, okay? So that's an issue that can invalidate your application, okay? And then there are a couple of exemptions. What I would say as well is if you're doing a check, although I don't know if anybody does checks anymore, is it? Sounds old school. But if you are, it can take up to 10 days to clear a check. So if you're submitting a check on behalf of a 7-day, you're done. You know what I mean? That's not going to happen. So be mindful of little things like that. And what I would say, EFTs, of course, are better nowadays. Everything's getting faster. But if you're talking to 2 different institutions, it can take a couple of days to clear. So just be mindful of that as well, if you're dealing with the 7 days, okay? Because your clock is ticking immediately from when you submit for a 7-day, all right? And it would be a reason to invalidate an application, okay? And then you have to start again, which is torturous at times, especially if it's complicated building, okay? The other side is, obviously, there's exemptions from the fees. Please be mindful, because I know in Mayo we get a lot of saying, oh, I'm exempt, because I'm a local football team, but I have a bar in my clubhouse. That's gain and profit, do you know? You're not doing it solely. There might be someone on site, you might be paying someone. You have to be very distinct. In Mayo as well, we would ask that you would justify why you are exempt if you're clicking that box other than for a different way of paying. So just be mindful of that. And again, consult your local authority. What's your stance on this? Do you accept, like another local authority may well accept a clubhouse with the bar, you know, but if you're making a profit on site, be it a homeless place, a shelter, or any clubhouse for social, recreational, religious purposes, if you're making a gain or a profit on site, it's not a voluntary organisation, and you will be obliged to pay fees, okay? So it's just something to be mindful of. There was something else. Okay, I wanted this at the end. This is a tool that I pilfered over my years of working, but I have updated it. It's a quick reference sheet, probably more for the contingent in the audience. Do I need a fire cert? How do I need a fire cert? When do I need a fire cert? What's involved in it? It's a quick reference sheet, the exemptions, a couple of definitions as well. It's just a quick reference. I found it useful over the years when I was on the other side of the fence, so to speak. But sometimes you will and won't need a fire cert. So it's a useful tool, a quick stop shop. Gives you the breakdown of what everything is needed. Sometimes there's a little ambiguity maybe about when a fire cert is needed or what is an exemption, okay? I have a copy of that in PDF, by the way, so if anybody wants it, I'll send it on to you. My details are at the end. So we'll move on to this. Right, this is the important bit. Consultants, if you've been asleep, please wake up. Right, documents and information to be submitted, right? Fundamentals, people. A good set of drawings, comprehensive, detailed, relevant information, decent scale, please. Like, I know we all have the computers now, but like, you can still get shocking scales, or they're not matching the scale that's said in the title block, okay? So be mindful of your drawings that way. A decent set of drawings, application form, comprehensive compliance report, and the appropriate fee. And making sure that if you are doing a 7-day, you have your 7-day signed and dated. And if you are doing, or a statutory, signed and dated, and your statutory deck is included, signed, dated and stamped. And if you're doing a reg, the same. And then make sure you've chosen the right type. The information I've put down here in italics, in my opinion, or in my humble opinion, is the minimum information that should be going on each of the kinds of drawings. Okay, I'll touch on the reports as well in a minute. But they're minimum information bits. We have a rule in Mayo, we don't want to see any smoke detectors or emergency lighting, okay? We don't want locations on the drawings because there's no way to verify that they're correct or adequate or sufficient, all right? It's enough to state in the report that they will be in compliance with either 3218 or 3217, okay? Plus appendices. That's a design thing, and we don't want it said that, oh, this is going here, but it was on the drawing, so it's going there. It may not be correct. Layouts can change, bits and pieces, okay? So we, in Mayo at least, we don't like to see ELs, emergency lighting positions, or smoke detectors or heat detector positions, okay? But we would expect to see the rest of the information. You'd be surprised how many people talk about the compartmentation and the fire safety and the fire separation and everything in the report, and then there's nothing on the drawing. Not a dicky bird of anything on the drawing. You know, you might get a line, but it's not a compartment line, or it's not showing any fire resistance. It's just a plain drawing, which, you know, the drawing itself does give a lot of information. But if you're telling me I've protected 30 minutes around here, or I've protected, there's 2 compartments, I have 60 minutes between them, but it's not shown. That's again silly stuff that's gone time wasting. Back out. Please put the information on your drawings relevant to your compliance report. Like, it works both ways too. You could have a brilliant drawing and nothing in the report, or this kind of crack of as per section 1.4.2.3. Please explain how you're meeting the requirements of 1.4.3.2 or whatever it is. Do you know? Don't just say, and oh, read bugbear mine. Especially with existing buildings, and you're coming in and you're doing your external fire spread, okay? Don't say just as existing. As existing. What does that mean? That building mightn't have been touched in 20 years and you're doing something to it. There could have been 3 buildings that went up around it in the meantime. That's going to change your external fire spread, even if you're not touching your external walls, okay? So don't write silly stuff like that, okay? Because it'll only get your backs up anyway. As existing. Oh, copy and paste, you know? Like, good luck, you know, we're already going, right, that one will get parked there, they're not doing enough, they're being a bit lazy, you know, and you'll focus on the other ones that are decent. So it's things to be mindful of, okay? Probably hashed a bit with it. Wait, now mate, I'm sure I have notes on this. Oh yes, copy and paste into that. Yeah, so, yeah, just be mindful of your descriptions. In your compliance report, make sure you also detail the design basis that you're going to use. So many people just launch into a report. Like, just take a minute to describe the works, which should match all your documents. The description in your report should match your application form, your 7-day notice description, and your statutory description. Okay, that should all be pre-populated. And if you put it in correctly in the first place when you're making your BCMS submission, it gets pre-populated. Okay, so don't be messing like that. And then the description should match in the compliance report as well. And we would look for, I'll move on to this. So Owen did a brilliant presentation there, very comprehensive, fair play to you. At the minute, a lot of people are still using the 2006 reprint 2020, and the headings we would look for in the compliance report are B1 to B5, typically. There's a lot more to be considered in the 2024. Owen has thoroughly gone through that. Basically, for the consultants in the audience, get familiar, get really familiar. Now's your chance to get really familiar with what's in that document. You have a couple of months, because when May 1st comes, it's coming into play, you know, and once 28 hits, tough tiddles, you know, this is the one you're using, and it's quite comprehensive, and there is limitations that weren't there before. Me being a bit of a nerd, I like to highlight all the additions of the new issues, and I can't do it this way because it's a different format. It's a little bugbear of mine, right? I have to do it a different way now with my little highlights. But there is a lot in there, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's a reference book. It's a one-stop shop, as Richard said earlier, with the little reference outside. But that has to be, otherwise you'd be looking at a 1,000-page document. That's enough. Can't be printing them things. But you know, so just be mindful that there's nothing stopping any consultant applying or making an application now in a 2024 version, but there is a lot more to be covered in that, and please be mindful of that. So, right, I think I'll move on. Yes, okay. This is the other important bit for the consultants, please. What we look for at validation assessment and where an extension of time might come into play. All right, so if I can succinctly put it, although I'm a terrible waffler, but validation is essentially documentational review from us. We're making sure that all the relevant documents have been submitted so that we can validate. When we get to assessment, we're looking at a technical review of the documents submitted, okay? So I'm just, when I receive an application, or when I did, you'd be double checking certain things. And if further information goes out, like I said, if it's to do with the 7-day, make sure you turn that around quickly, or it's pushing out your start date, okay? Now with other applications, it's not as much pressure. But if we're coming back with further information versus revised information, further information means your application hasn't been validated yet, okay? So the stuff outstanding, you can't even get going, right? If you're getting the revised information, you know, we've ticked the box, thankfully, with the basics at least. So if you're getting further information, one of the following is probably not sufficient or hasn't been provided, okay? So application form, make sure you have the right name, or if you're acting as the agent, put in your name, proper address with an air code. There's no excuse these days, everybody knows their air code, okay? Stick on the air code. Even if you have an old fella that's your client, find out his air code. There's no excuse nowadays, okay? Go online, post office, whatever. I think you get 5 tries a day or whatever, you can find a postcode, right? And then the only handwritten parts of those applications, or that application form, is the signature and the date. And like I said earlier, don't forget you have to download, sign it, date it, stick it back up, okay? So when that comes in, we're looking at that. Make sure, like I said, the relevant parts in the compliance report are covered, the design basis you're going to use, that there's a sufficient and adequate description of the works, and then that you've covered B1 to B5, or if you're using 2024, the extra sections, if they're applicable. I don't know what every county is like. This is, again, another Mayo thing, I think. You don't have to, you know, populate your report with every single heading from TGGB, okay? And then go non-applicable, non-applicable, non-applicable. You know, we're trying to save the planet, and we keep typing things like NA, oh, this isn't relevant. In Mayo, we're happy to say, if it's not applicable, don't stick it in. We don't need to know about it, don't stick it in. Now, it's not to say at a later date when we're actually assessing it, we go, you forgot this, stick it in, you know? But, you know, I know there's templates out there that they just have everything in there, oh, non-applicable, NA. And sometimes it is applicable, and it's just a copy and paste thing, you know, and because it's so wordy, and they're so used to doing 10,000 of them every day, they don't look at them properly. So again, back to the point, get somebody else to read your report before you submit, okay? So in terms of that, and then obviously the relevant drawings are submitted. In Mayo, if you have an existing building, we like to see an existing set of drawings plus a drawing set with the proposed works. If you're doing internal stuff within the envelope, obviously if it's an extension, that's clear cut, you're just adding on. But if it's internal alterations, show existing versus proposed. Okay, it's straightforward. We'll only end up going back out to you asking for them anyway, as part of the requested information, you know, so you're as well to get them in. And like I said, any pertinent information that you think, if you're doing the complicated smoke controls, if you have it done, submit it. The sooner we get to look at it, the sooner it gets ticked off, you know, or problems are highlighted and revisions can be made, okay? And indeed, if you're not sure whether something is needed, I believe most local authorities are happy for a pre-consult. You know, if you're unsure, you have a complex building, come in and have a chat before you do anything. So you're not backing and forthing and costing your client and time wasting, everybody, you know. We're all human at the end of the day, say hello, you know. So, and please be mindful that if you change any important details on any of the application forms or any bits and pieces, like these things happen, you can change contractor or change engineer, you need to download those forms again and then re-upload and resubmit, okay? So if any information, important information changes, that's the case. So then when we get down, assuming everything is correct there and happy days, we're moving on. When we get to the assessment, we're looking at a technical review here. So we're looking in depth at the drawings provided and at the compliance report and any other technical reports that might come in. I don't know if it's necessarily a Mayo rule, but it's good practice, I shall say, for the consultant contingency. If you get a requested or a revised information request and you make changes to your report, please highlight where the changes have been made. Like, make it a rainbow document if you have to, if you're in and out and in and out. And bubble on the drawings changes that you're making. It makes it so much easier, especially if it's a complex building. I was hoping to show you examples today, but I won't get to them because I'm too waffly. But it was a large building and there was a few back and forths. But it was so much easier to see where they had made the changes and the updates on the drawing bubble around you know. In this day and age, like the PDFs and the blue beams and the nitros, they're all handy as hell, okay? And especially, like, change your text or highlight at least the text that you've changed, or cross out and start again and stuff, but make changes and highlight where they are, you know, because it makes it so much easier. Because if we've a chunky report and we have to read it every single time to find out where does it go, you know, like, just be a bit more conscientious that way. But I would have always asked for changes to be highlighted in different colour text and bubbles on the drawing where you're making alterations, okay? It's a simple thing. Like, if you're making the changes anyway, it takes 2 seconds to bubble, you know, or highlight the colour. Now, when the information goes out, with extension of times coming into play, we have quite a strict policy in Mayo. It wasn't always that way, but we have pulled in the reins. It's basically, you get a max of 4 months ultimately on any application. You can either apply for a 1-2 month or a 2-1 month. So a maximum extension of 1-2 month period, okay? So when we send out our revised information, I'm ticking, am I? Yeah, I'm nearly there. When we send out our revised information, there's always a due date on it. And if we don't receive the information by that due date, then we will make a decision one way or the other, especially if there's been radio silence, you know. If we're not hearing back from the consultant. Now, by all means, there's time needed to gather information and answer the questions we've asked. But simple phone call to say, look, I need another week there. And if there's time on the application, we've no problem that way. But we will give it a state, and we are quite strict that unless you're then requesting an ET. Be mindful, the only way you can change the decision date on an application is to submit an extension of time. That's the only way you can push out the decision date from an application. It's the only way it gets moved, all right? And in Mayo, just because we have a due date on the revised, that it doesn't necessarily impact the actual application date. It's just a due date that we want back, that we think is sufficient time to gather the information. But if you are having a bother, then do that. Now, not every building or every local authority might do it this way, but that's the way we go. So, I'm conscious he's hanging on there. Where was I? Yeah, so when you need an extension time, in my opinion, there's probably 2 elements of where you might look for an extension time. So a technical advisor may look for it to extend his time or their time, in that sense that they need more time to gather the information. The other side is that the information has come back into us, and we are actually the ones who push out the extension of time, because there's only a week left on the application, and we have administrative duties that can take a week, sometimes 2 weeks, depending, to get processed. And it's a chain of approval that happens within each local authority, and there is a time related to that. So in some instances, we have asked for the EOT to push that out. And then just, I'll finish up on that, and then just some main points to take away, all right? Ensure all relevant parties, your applicant, owner, technical advisor, contractor, have an account on BCMS. They need to be fully verified. So if you can't nominate them, they're not verified, all right? Choose the correct type of application and download all the relevant documents. Make sure you sign, stamp, date, all right, where required. Ensure the application description is apt and it is the same on all accompanying documents, all right? Submit clear and relevant drawings with applicable and relevant information. Check and pay the P, and then if you are, like I said, if you are doing it otherwise, make sure you upload. That's our rule in Mayo anyway, that you upload the receipt. You need to justify exemptions. Every fire authority is different. Make sure about the wording between the reg certs and the other 3. No shoulds, okay? Should is a bad word, even though I used it. But adequate and appropriate compliance reports and drawings submitted for validation and assessment, and then further information versus revised information. Okay, it's just validated and not validated, but be mindful of those, especially with your 7-day notice. And then check with your local authority in terms of extension of times. Everybody has a different approach to these things, so there's no harm in checking in. And if you're unsure about how your local authority is approaching things, ask them. You know, just ask them. Anyway, they're my details. They'll be online, I'm sure. If you have any questions, happy days. Okay, thank you. All down. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Arnold. We'll